Hello and welcome to the magic of fishing. Today you join me on a rather magical morning. The sun's just coming up on a really cold and frosty winter's morning, and I am back on the banks of the River Wey in Surrey. And I've come back to somewhere that I've only fished once before. It's called Somerset Bridge, and it's a beautiful little spot. You may remember I came here on a scorching summer's day to explore for the first time and was really blown away by the beauty of the place. Very different conditions today, and it's going to be difficult fishing, but if there's one thing I've learned running a YouTube channel and trying to fish most weeks, no matter whether it's chucking it down red hot or like today icy and bitterly cold, it's always worth getting out, and you've just got to adapt your approach to the conditions and sometimes your expectations. I'm not here to catch tons of fish this morning, but it's been an absolute pleasure just to be here in the dark and see the sun come up, have a walk over the frosty banks and disturb a few pheasants and other early morning wildlife. It's just good to be alive on a morning like this. So we've come to the river for only the second time, or this particular stretch for only the second time. It's run by Farnham Angling Society and it does hold a few chub, but rather than come here with hard expectations of targeting and catching chub, I've come with a few maggots, some bread, some corn and even a few worms, and a really open mind. It'll be a case of fishing for bites, and if we get a chub it'll be a real bonus, but really here just to enjoy the splendour of the British countryside, get on the water and see what's possible. Now, you've heard me say this before and I'll say it again, variety's the spice of fishing, and I'm always trying new places, new things, trying to bring you folks at home a bit of interest, and you never know what to expect from week to week. And although today's still conditions, high pressure, virtually no wind at all, bright skies, not ideal fishing conditions at all really, especially with the sharp drop in temperature overnight, but these still conditions would have made ideal float fishing conditions at least. You know, very good control down the river. It is just fining down after some wet weather and the storms of a week ago. Don't know when you'll be watching this, but it's early February as I film this, and it's not so long ago we got battered by a couple of storms. You may have seen previous videos of me enduring that kind of bad weather, but I just fancied doing something a bit different today. You've seen me fish the float plenty this winter already, and plenty of fish caught as well. It's been a fantastic start to 2025. But I thought I'd bring the tip rod today, start on the maggot feeder, just fishing for bites as I say, and we'll take a roving approach, try different spots. It's lovely as that sun comes up above the trees, warming my face for the first time. The steam coming off the river. But we'll take a roving approach. We'll try a few spots with the maggot feeder. I've got worms as I say, and a bit of bread. If I want to try a bit of bread flake on the hook, and we'll perhaps fish 4 or 5 different swims, see whether we can buy a bite off anything. But yeah, I thought it'd make a nice change to get on the tip and hopefully see it rattle round at least once. Little bit of weed on the retrieve after the first cast, but not snagged up, and seems to be a nice clean, relatively clean bottom out there. It is a quite weedy stretch this during the summer, and that's why I fancied coming back in the winter. Let's get to fish a few spots that would be inaccessible during the warmer months. It's a very gentle cast down towards an overhanging tree. I'm fishing quite a straight stretch to begin with. Wanted to get fishing as soon as I could while the light levels are still relatively low. But if we don't get any luck in the first half hour, 45 minutes here, I'll go wandering upstream and we'll perhaps look for some deeper holes on bends, some nice overhanging cover from trees and shrubs, and maybe rafts of debris that have caught up in winter floods. Yeah, and we'll just give it a go on worm, corn, maggots, see what's willing to warm up this freezing winter's day. Fishing with fairly robust gear. The Drennan Specialist twin tip rod, £1.25 test curve, so an Avon style rod, nice through action, and I've got the white quiver tip section, top section in today. £6 main line and a £5 hook length down to a size 14. Just start with a bunch of maggots, but size 14 should give me the versatility to be able to try a worm or a piece of corn. And it actually feels spot on now the sun's gone behind a bit of cloud. I don't think there's going to be much around today, but with the mist coming off the river and that bright sun just veiled slightly by the clouds at the moment, it's proper winter fishing conditions. Beautiful morning, and whether it's a chub or a little trout that comes along, I really will be happy with anything today. It's just grand to be on the bank, and as always have you folks with me. And the days are getting a bit longer now. We're through the hard yards of January and the really short days into February. Obviously not sure when you'll be watching this, but it's February as I film this, and that's a nice short month. Was that a little tap then? Ooh, could have had a little tap then. And his second cast. It's always hard to tell in winter when you've still got bits of weed and debris coming down the river. Anything that catches in the line can give you that impression of a quick pull. That could be encouraging. But yeah, as the sun comes back out from behind the clouds, warms me up a bit. It is great to have got January out of the way. Not the biggest fan of winter fishing. It's fantastic to get out, and it can bring you some sights and sounds and experiences that are very different to all the other seasons, of course. And I think you have to try and cherish each season. We're very lucky in the UK to have these 4 distinct seasons, but it's hard work on the fishing front a lot of the time, and not easy getting out of bed on a really cold, dark morning. But if I choose to, I probably will be able to fish till 5 o'clock this evening, and even beyond if I want to fish into dark. But the light is stretching out now and the days are getting longer. I'll check the bait, get some more feed out there. You've clearly got to be a bit more careful with your feed in winter, and quite often I'll fish single baits, bread flake or worm. But with maggot, I don't think it does any harm to keep a few casts going in. start turning that splash of the feeder from a potential cause of alarm for the fish to something that signals the dinner bell. And in these cold conditions, I'm not expecting to, whip up a shoal of fish into a feeding frenzy, but certainly big greedy fish like chub, they will start picking up on the availability of food. Noisy geese go overhead. So you keep that regular feed going in, just like you would on the float. You're not going to overfeed the fish with a few maggots. And with this kind of flow on the river, it's just fining down. It's all going to get washed away anyway. So the idea of regular casting, you're going to get some regular trickle of maggots going off down the river. And with fish like chub, you can pull them up from far below. So two styles of fishing really today. One will be the regular casting with a maggot feeder, and we'll see whether we can get any bites that way. And if we're struggling maybe by midday with that, we're not having any luck, then we'll move on to big baits, single baits, big lobworm or a big piece of bread flake. I'll move on to a bigger hook, maybe go straight lead rather than feeder. Right, I think it's time to move and try some slower water perhaps. Might be that the river's pushing through a bit too much for the fish to be in a fairly straight, fast-paced stretch like this, so we'll perhaps have to try and find a bend or a little back eddy, a slack, see whether there's any fish holed up in there. But it's always good to explore and get a real sense of the river on the day. Just stopped to have a quick go on this broad bend. It's really just because the river widens out that the pace comes off it a bit. There might be a bit more depth, but I'm just resting the rod on the bank and you can see the tip's barely pulled round, so although it's not really a slack, the pace here is a lot less than it was further down, so we'll give it 5 minutes here, maybe 10, see whether I can buy a bite and then we'll move on. Still plenty of ice around despite the sun starting to get up. Look at these old burdocks, still with a few seed pods on that didn't get pulled off by cows or anglers. Sticky things. That's a reminder of summer. They'll be back pushing up again in another few months. It's a really interesting peninsula almost, this, between, well, around a big bend. And places like this it's clearer to see how much the river is still pushing through. There's plenty of current coming through. There's interesting slack on the inside here, just off this sandbank or silt trap. Not a lot of slow water though. Just come over the other side, there's some lovely overhanging cover. And that is a bit slower as well over there, beyond the main flow on the inside. I think it could be worth a chuck over to to the cover there where there's a bit of slacker water. Tricky little cast so as not to land in the snags, of course, but the slack water is just off the edge. That's about right. It just remains to be seen whether there's enough lead on that feeder to hold it in place against the main flow, but it looks to be holding okay. Let out a bit of line, take the pressure off. See if there's anything at home over there. Although the sun is now up, the sky is blue. A tinge of colour still in the water should help take the sting out of that bright sun. And this is why I've got a £1.25 test curve rod and a £6 mainline, despite the fact I'm fishing for bites, fishing for anything. If I was lucky enough to hook a chub or a better fish near all that jungle over there, I need to give it some serious stick to have any chance of getting it out. And at this point I'd like to do a little shout out. I wish I could do shout outs to you all every time, but it would take a bit too long. But I think one man in particular, Andy Sinclair up in Scotland, deserves a little shout out, because he dropped me a line this week to say that watching this channel had inspired him to go fishing for the first time in decades. I think, like me, he's in his 50s, and he said the last time he'd been fishing was when he was 15. But he'd seen a few of the videos and it got him back out on the bank, and he said his first trip was on a day like this, clear blue, cold, and both he and some pretty serious match anglers on the venue didn't catch a thing. It was one of those days. Could be the same today, of course. We wait to see. But we know it's not all about catching fish, and the most heartening thing about the email was he said he'll be back out on the bank despite not catching anything, and despite deciding to take fishing back up in the middle of winter, he will be back out, and he really enjoyed it. So it's so heartwarming and humbling to hear stories like that, and good on Andy and anyone else watching who's thinking of having the first go for a while, or even giving it a go during the winter months when they've not previously got out much. Bit of a fair weather type. It's not always about catching fish, and it's fantastic to hear of fellow anglers who've rediscovered the magic and are giving it another go. And I did say to him in a brief reply that it's fantastic that he'd managed to do that in, I think it was January when he'd made the first trip, and I said just wait till spring and imagine the same feeling, but with the warmth of the sun on your back and a few fish biting, and that really will be enjoyable. So yeah, shout out to Andy and anyone else who's just got back into fishing or thinking about getting back into it. It's well worth the effort, even on days like today. Right, that's been a good 20 minutes or so. We move on, we try and find the fish. And that is one of the beauties of fishing rivers, is this ability to go and look for spots that look fishy. It's not like a commercial fishery, and I've got nothing against commercials, I fish them quite often. Love days out on commercials, but particularly when I'm fishing matches. But the thing about a river is there are no defined pegs. Not on a wild bit of river like this anyway. You've just got the whole bank to yourself. There's no one else here today, or not that I've seen, and on a beautiful winter's day like this, you can roam about, look for spots that might just hold fish, give them a go, and you're not limited to one peg or one swim like you might be in a match, or if you brought a load of gear to a still water. Again, nothing wrong with those types of fishing. I do that kind of fishing all the time. But there is something a bit special about having a wander and just trying a few different spots. You needn't even walk far. It's not about walking miles and miles of riverbank. You might just have 2 or 3 spots on a very short stretch. But if it doesn't feel right, you're not getting bites, you can move on and find the next likely looking hole. Well, I've just set up in another likely looking spot further upstream. Again, why does it look likely? Well, there's a bend further up that's sending the water, the main flow, over to the far bank. So this inside bank is, the flow here is quite slow and steady. And there's also a bit of bank falling in down here, creating a bit of a slack. And beyond that is the overhanging branches of that tree. You can see it's caught up quite a bit of debris in the winter floods. And although I'm not exclusively targeting chub today, it does feel quite chubby. It's also a well-worn piece of earth here. It looks like it's fished at least somewhat regularly, and that's, you know, that can be a bad thing if the fish are pressured in one particular spot, but it also can mean that some feed goes in here on a regular basis, and other anglers have probably had some success here, hence revisiting. So when you're on a new piece of water, or relatively new like this, only the second time I fished it, and only, well, the first time I fished it in winter. Good bit of depth as well for this river. There's felt like there was a good 5 foot there, maybe more. But yeah, when you're exploring somewhere for the first time, although I was saying earlier, one of the nice things about that is not being constrained to set pegs or swims. If you do see signs of anglers, it can mean there's a reason for that. This may well be a fish holding spot. So we'll give it a go. There's plenty more upstream to go at yet. And again, these bright conditions are really not good for catching fish in from any venue really. It's fine in summer when the water's warm, but when the water's cold and the pressure's high, fish are generally going to be tucked up really tight into snags or undercut banks out of these bright conditions. There's always another chance, of course, in the evening when that light starts to fall again. But on these bright days, I do like a live natural bait like maggots, worms, to try and provoke some kind of a response in tricky conditions. Really peaceful. Just the odd cry from a red kite or a pair of kites circling behind. The sound of running water. This is the decompression I need between working weeks. The sun's definitely sinking a bit lower now into mid-afternoon, and perhaps the lower light levels might give me a chance for fish before home time, so let's head back downstream and perhaps try with a bigger bait. Well, I've now come right downstream below where I started the day. And I'm just going to give maggot one last go because The far bank on this straight stretch, or rather at the bottom of the straight stretch, has got a real nice steady slower pace to the main current, and I'm thinking it might be worth just a few chucks over there first with the maggots before I switch to a bigger bait. The water's slowed by that far bank tree that juts out from the bank, just creates a bit of slack water behind it. Right, with the sun heading below the trees and soon below the horizon, it really is time for the last roll of the dice, all or nothing on chub. And to do that, I'm going to take the feeder off the snap link swivel. Simple as that. Goes back in the pocket, and here's an unusual looking lead that I prepared earlier. There is in fact about an ounce and a half, 2 ounce gripper lead in there, but it's covered in homemade cheese paste with added garlic and a bit of Marmite, and I can tell you now it's pretty pungent even in this rapidly cooling air. But just like I'd do in summer with a bit of pellet paste around the bottom to add that extra scent and attraction, that will hopefully leak off. Well, I know it will leak off. Put the maggot hook length down. Again, quick change, swivel on the end. Here we've got a short hook length down to a size 6 and some 6-pound nylon, only a short hook length for chub. As quick as that, we've changed a maggot feeder rig into a cheese paste chub rig, and we'll give that a go on the far bank, or towards the far bank, where the pace is about half that down the main river. Again, a little tricky cast. But that is absolutely spot on. I can still cast even though I'm not catching today. I'll let a little bow form to take some pressure off, but this is it for the last hour now. Chub o'clock, as the sun starts going down. We're almost into dusk, and that's when I'd expect a chub, if we are to get one today. I've got a feeling we're not going to get anything. It's been that kind of day. You can't buy a bite on maggots. It's been really cold, really bright, and that high pressure in charge now. Sudden drop in temperature last night. It's really everything you'd not want before a fishing session. You either want steady temperatures even when they're low, or temperatures in the water that are just creeping back up again after a cold spell. And this is really the first day after a sudden drop in temperature, so not ideal. And it's been really bright, but now we're into dusk. We'll give it one last shot and see whether we can catch anything, or just put this down as a lovely day on the bank, fishing and not catching. Well folks, I'll be fishing till dark as the temperatures begin to plummet again. And you never know, with that stinky cheese paste there's always a chance. And if I do get lucky, you'll be the first to know. But I think I better say my goodbyes now, because it has felt like that kind of day where it's just not to be. I said right up front the conditions were going to be very tricky, and it's proved the case, but it isn't all about catching fish. And I think it's important, if you're running a fishing YouTube channel, to make it clear that sometimes you don't catch, and it's not the be all and end all, and I'm no different. It has been an absolutely gorgeous day in all respects, other than the lack of bites. And I'm not going to kid myself or you, of course I would have loved to have caught, and I'm still willing that tip to go round now as I record my goodbyes, but it's still been a really tranquil day on the bank, really peaceful, and despite the lack of company, nature has provided plenty of sights and sounds, and it's just wonderful to be next to running water from a chilly dawn, frosty dawn, right through to a sunset and dusk. A real privilege to do that from time to time, especially in winter when it's more difficult than ever to get out of the house, or sometimes make yourself get out of the house. But just like Andy up in Scotland, who dropped me that line earlier this week, I've come out, I've given it a go, and I've not caught anything, but just like Andy, I've enjoyed it, and I'm already thinking about my next trip. So I hope you've enjoyed it too, despite the lack of action, fishing action that is. And stay safe, keep warm, and I'll see you again before long on the bank.